All right, this is my second attempt at making this video because the first one was an hour long. So I'm going to try to keep this one shorter and simple. You may want to speed up the video to like 1.5 times or 2 times speed in order to get all the information a little quicker. I believe you will be able to still understand what I'm trying to say. So economies exist because of scarcity, because there is unlimited wants, unlimited wants, but limited resources. Specifically, those resources are the resources we use to create anything, and that is land, labor, and capital. Now, each of these are fairly straightforward in what they refer to. Land is physical area. So if you are making shoes or a car, that would be factories and the land, etc. The land that the factory is on, but it would also be like the metals from the earth, etc. If you are making a website and you don't need land specifically, the server, you still need a server, which is the place it's housed, the location, the physical location. Labor, again, very straightforward. It's the labor, both physical and mental. So the physical labor of putting together a car, mining metals, etc. And mental labor of designing the car, but also mental labor of maybe making a website. If you're making a website, you don't have a lot of physical labor, like fingers, but you're a lot of mental labor in that case. Capital refers to money and equipment and technology. So for a website, that would be the technology of the computer, as well as the software that you're using. Capital in a factory, etc., would be like the robots and whatnot, but also the tech to run those robots, the tech to organize the spreadsheets to pay everybody. Money is the power in which that we use to hire people and push our agenda, I guess. So that is capital. The investment, so the buying of this, the buying of capital would be called investment. If you buy equipment and technology, you haven't actually done anything. If you've used your money to buy these things, you haven't actually created anything yet, but by buying it, you are investing. So that would be an investment if you do that, if you put it into capital. Now, the reason we have an economy is because of this. We have to find a way to organize this. So the question that economies are trying to answer, is how to use these best. Because they're limited, but we have unlimited wants and limited resources. So how do we use these best? Who gets them? How are they going to get you? Who gets them? How are they going to be used? How used, right? And different societies, different people have come up with different ways. And all those different ways, in theory, are on a spectrum, the economic spectrum. Economic spectrum. That's where they lay somewhere. Over here, we have the right and left. Now, on the extremes, you'll get over here, you'll get market economy or capitalism. And over here, you will get a planned economy, people call it, planned economies. They'll call it command economies and communism. People often call it. This section here is what we would call like socialism. And all of this, though, including socialism, is the mixed economy. So a mix of either right or left, mixed economy. Canada lies somewhere here, depending on who you ask. The United States might lie somewhere here. New Zealand is further this way, I believe. And then you have like Sweden, Denmark, and the other Scandinavian nations, etc. So somewhere in these areas, yeah, that's how the basic economic spectrum works. Now, the question is, which one should you use and why? So planned economy, communism, command economy, believes in collectivism. Collectivism. So for the better of all, for the better of all. So they believe that these things, land, labor, capital, should be used for the better of all, and generally equally, or at least equitably. Difference between equally and equitably, you should have heard this. So equally would be that everybody gets a car, right? In this society, everyone gets a car, but that would be equal, but that's not equitable because you don't need to get a car for a 5-year-old or for a 75-year-old. But people who need to get to work, or if somebody is a farmer, they might need a truck. Not everyone needs a truck, but farmers might need trucks. Construction workers might need trucks. So equitable is to those what they need, those what they need. So let's look really quick here at like a factory. This is a factory and it makes cars. So it's going in a population of like 50 million people in its society. This huge factory is going to make, well, not everyone needs a car, most people do. So yeah, 30 million cars, all the same, because it's really efficient to make cars that are all the same. You don't have to change the line, you don't have to change the color. You just create enough black paint and then all the cars are black. You don't have to waste money buying different paints, testing it, etc. You just like asking people what do you want? What color do you want? How fast do you want it to go? No, you make the most efficient car. So you think of what's the most efficient speeds, safety ratings, and then you make those cars. You make a few trucks, you make some trucks for those who need them. You make some massive trucks to transport stuff, etc. So this factory makes what the society needs. Of course, let fewer trucks, they probably don't even need 10 million, but etc. That's kind of how the planned economy works. And they do believe in this word efficiency, because they do believe it's efficient to have everything out of the same factory and not to produce more than people actually need. Why make 40 and have 10, why make 40 cars and have 10 extra million for those who might just want one? That's a waste. They don't actually need one. They can get by without it. And it's a waste of the economic resources of land, labor, and capital to make more than we actually need. So that's efficient. Also, no advertising, right? You don't need to advertise for anything. You save money on the advertising. You don't need to persuade people. You're just giving this to people. You're giving it to the people who need it. You don't have to persuade people to buy one or the other. You don't have to tell them you should buy this size of truck or that size. You just look at what size they need, and that's the truck you give them. Simple enough. And who's making all these decisions? So who's making all these decisions? Who's making all these decisions? The government. So the government controls all. Every company is a crown corporation. Now that's what we call them in Canada, the UK, where we have a queen at our head. So we call it a crown corporation because the crown owns it. In other countries that don't have a king or queen, they wouldn't call it a crown corporation. Australia calls it a crown corporation. The UK does, Canada does, but that's not, we're the ones who call it crown corporations. So just keep that in mind. Crown corporation. Everything publicly owned, right? And individual consumers then have little influence on decisions. So the general public has very little influence. That's not to say that the consumer can't tell the people who run the factory that, that we really like blue cars, and then the people in the factory hear that enough, they might take a poll and they might realize that lots of people want blue, and then they'll tell the government, and the government will be like, sure, whatever, that doesn't cost us a lot extra, give them blue cars. Or they'll say, you know what, these cars you've been making, sure, they might be efficient and fairly safe, but you know what, it does take longer than we expected to get places. Can we make them faster? And it's like, okay, well, the next round of cars, we'll make them slightly faster. We'll incorporate the next level of technology, etc. One of the concerns, however, on this side, one of the concerns is that your population less happy, right? Because they're not getting what they want, they get barely what they need, right? And so many of them are less happy. Now, the absolute destitute would rather maybe be in this society because they get food, clothing, a house, a car, maybe even. But the general population feels they are missing out, that they're not getting everything that they need. That should make sense. Also, motivation. This is the big one. What motivation in a planned economy do you have to be innovative? You come up with a brilliant new way of making a car. Why? Why share ideas? Why come up with ideas? Why push myself? So I make 10 cars in a day. Why would I make 15? I get paid the same no matter what, because in this society, we're a collective society, which means the doctor who takes 8 years of work and doesn't have much play, the teacher who takes 4 years of work, and then the custodian, the janitor, who takes 1 year of labor, like 1 year of schooling to get their job. So if they put in less work, shouldn't they get paid more? That's what the right would say. That's what the right would say. But the left would say, but the doctor needs teachers to teach the next generation who will help the doctor. They also need their own children to have teachers. The teacher needs the custodian. The custodian helps the teacher keep the school clean, but also helps the doctor keep the hospital clean. So the doctor doesn't have to do that. Doctor can focus on what he or she does best. Teacher can focus on what they do best, custodian, but they all need each other. They all need each other, and therefore everyone should get paid the same because we all contribute to the greater whole. But then what motivation does the doctor have to actually work for 8 years and give up a social life? The teacher who knows the custodian's getting just paid just as much, will they feel okay about putting so much more work into it? What if their job actually needs more work? The doctor has a lot more stress in their job. And so they might look at the teacher and be like, well, your job doesn't look as stressful. Neither does a custodian. Why am I not getting paid as much? So there's less motivation to work hard. That's the argument, is that on the left, there's going to be less motivation to work hard, to be innovative, to push yourself, because you're not going to get a better car. You're going to get the same car the custodian has to get to work and the same car the teacher has to get to work. We all drive the same car. So what am I getting? Now, the argument is, so what is the motivation? What is the motivation? The motivation is a pride in the community, in self. It's for the good, whatever that means. For the good of the nation, for the good of our community. You're doing it because you're a good person and you want to contribute to the greater good of your group. That is the argument that gets put forward. Think of the military. Why does one soldier push themselves so hard? Why does a soldier fight and sacrifice themselves? Well, they do it for pride, for their country, for their fellow soldier. They do it for the group. They don't do it for the pay. Like, don't get me wrong, they want to get paid. But in the same way that everybody here wants to get paid so they can live, the soldier wants to get paid, but the soldier knows that there are teachers getting paid more than they are. There are doctors getting paid more than they are. And they feel they're working really hard. And sure, they can become a lieutenant. They can become a captain, right? They can become these things, but they don't get paid actually. Captains and lieutenants get paid more, but it's not so significantly more. They do a lot more work. Same with principals. Principals do a lot more work. Assistant principals do a lot more work than teachers. So you often move to these positions, again, out of a pride, out of a belief that you can do it, out of being clapped on the shoulder for doing more and greater things for your community. This is why that in the military, people do these things. So think of the military as a microcosm of like what a communist society might look like. Now, it doesn't work perfectly because the military is paid by, the country itself. So other people doing work, doctors, et cetera, doing work and getting taxed and getting to it. But in a microcosm, think of the military as why. That for motivation, if you want to think of motivation, think of the military. That's what they believe on the left. Now, all that information, let's go over to the right and capitalism. I'm going to pause it here so I can charge my pencil. All right. In a market economy, it's all about individualism. In many ways, the market economy understands that people are naturally selfish. It sounds like a cruel word, but it doesn't need to be. It means that they have a they fight for themselves. We are at our core animals that still want the best for us and ours and our children. And the market economy understands that, and it organizes itself around a way that can make selfishness work for the whole. So in this one, privately owned. Every resources, land, labor, and capital are privately owned. So private businesses. Because of that, they are the ones who get to decide who gets what. So they decide what's going to be made. Individuals decide what and who gets them. That's essentially what happens in this one. So let's look back at our factory example. So, factory, but are you going to have just one factory? Of course not. You're going to have multiple factories. You're going to have multiple factories, different sizes potentially, all making cars. They're all making cars. And you'll have ones that make, they think that orange cars are going to be the next big thing. So they make, a bunch of oil, they make 10 million orange cars. This one, the other one makes, 10 million black cars, as well as some trucks and cars. This one here also makes luxury cars, makes some luxury cars, some normal like black cars, etc. And then the individual person decides what they want. What do I want? Do I want an orange car? Well, they're medium priced. These cars here are fairly cheap. The luxury cars are expensive. And trucks are also medium price. Well, for a medium price, I'd rather have a truck than an orange car or a small car. And if I'm going to spend that much, maybe I'll go for a luxury car, but I don't have that much. So I'm not going to buy those. So, and this company knew that and only made 1 million of the luxury cars because they knew not many people would be able to afford that. These ones, are they the same quality as the ones made here? Maybe the quality is a little better because they make luxury cars. They also make these ones a little better for the same price. So suddenly this factory here, which sold trucks fairly well, is going to continue doing that. But it's actually either going to scrap making cars altogether and just focus on being a truck person, or they're going to make their cars of a higher quality to compete with these guys over here, or they'll keep them at the same quality, but drop the price. So make it half of $1. And so that this person here will be like, you know what, even though it's less quality, now it's a better price. These guys over here, their call at making orange cars did not work well at all. So they believe though that there's still something to be said about choice. So instead of everyone making black cars, they're gonna make purple ones. And suddenly people are like, for that price, purple I'll take. So now through all of this, there is inefficiency. It is efficient in the sense that people get exactly what they want. People get what they want. None of these factories continue making things that nobody wants. It's not like a bunch of stuff just gets made and nobody actually wanted it, which in the left-hand side, they claim to be efficient. But what if everyone hates those cars? Suddenly it's like, well, yeah, people can get around, but it's not efficient as far as keeping people happy or satisfying your population. Over here, the individual is satisfied. Satisfied. Sorry. Over here, the individual is satisfied. They find somewhere to be satisfied in all of this, but it is inefficient because you just wasted all this paint. Wasted resources if no one wants it. Right? Just before COVID, these companies, before COVID, all of these companies before COVID were making their trucks, their cars, their luxury cars, their cheaper cars. They were making all of these in the same amount that they assumed everyone was going to buy. But what happened? Well, COVID came and suddenly they couldn't sell any of them. So now a lot of these have to be, maybe they're not going to scrap them, but they've had to lower the price significantly. They've had, some of them have gone back for refitting because they have to retool them for another year. They're going to re-release them with better stuff. So there's waste in here. If you can think of clothing, do you think that Prada makes beautiful clothing, but it's really expensive? Do you think they sell all their shirts and handbags? They don't. And so what happens to all the rest? Well, they can't have homeless people. They can't give it away to the homeless people because you can't have homeless people walking around Prada. So they destroy excess. They destroy excess clothing, excess whatever, shoes, not just Prada, but lots of companies just destroy the things that didn't sell, or they sell them at a loss so that there's no gain necessarily to the economy. Some people get it though. Again, some people, even the poor, will get some of these items. So in a way, there is a trickle down of resources, because the price, the great thing about the right is that price keeps falling until most everyone can get something, because there's always going to be stuff. Now, because Prada destroying their excess, that works for luxury goods, but there's a lot of clothing out there that doesn't need to be destroyed. Nobody cares if you're wearing their clothing. And so it can be used by those in the lower socioeconomic bracket. All right, how else is it inefficient though? Advertising. The amount of money spent on advertising in order to compete between these different factories. These factories have to advertise their cars. The advertising, I've used this example in class a lot, but Nike spends more on ads than shoes. So now you're asking yourself, well, all that money that they spend on advertising, if they just made shoes, they could make twice as many shoes. And then they could be cheaper and you'd be using resources more efficiently. What a waste of time all this advertising. What a waste of money all that advertising is. On top of that, you have competing factories. Why do you have 3 factories doing the same thing? Why do you have 3 robots? Well, robot and engine lines. Why do you have 3 executives, 3 CEOs, 3 designers, 3 advertising CEOs? Why do you, like, over here you have one big factory that just does it and does it well over and over and over again. Over here you have 3 that are constantly multiplying the amount of people and things that need to be done. Not all the people, don't get me wrong, you still need 100,000 people to make all these vehicles, and you still need 100,000 people on the floor to make these, but all the executives and stuff, you have excess executives all over the place. You have excess marketers all over the place. There's excess materials to build the building all over the place. Excess software and excess robots and technology and equipment all over the place. Right? Land is not being used very well. Neither is capital. Capital and land is not being used very efficiently because you have 3 different factories, or in America's case, 100,000 different factories doing these kind of things. So there are some of the inefficiencies that you can find in there, but motivation. The big selling feature for the right is that selfishness motivates. If you come up with a brilliant ideas, get money for it. Work hard, get a raise, get money for it, right? And it's not like they lose out on these things. There's still pride over here. You can still do things for the good, right? So it's not like you lose out on that either, but you also get money. You also get the motivation of getting more money so you can get more shoes. Now, Obviously, the problem, hopefully you know what the problem is. The problem is the poor. What about the poor? So we just talked about how over here, everybody gets a car who needs it on the left. Everyone who gets a car. But over here, who gets what? Those who can afford it. But what if to get the job, what if this poor person needs a job and they need a car to get to the job, but they can't afford the car, so then they don't get the job. So the rich, the wealthy get wealthier. Because the wealthy can afford the faster cars, the better cars. They can afford to move to a city with better jobs. Like if you are a poor person and there's no jobs in your area and you can't drive into the city, you can't move to a different city, you don't have the money for any of that. So now what do? Right? The poor are left stranded. Let's look really quick at an example like private schools. Private schools. The left would say no to private schools. All children equal. Not their fault. Well, not their fault if they were born poor, so they were born poor or challenged. You know, they have ADHD, they have dyslexia like myself. You know, it's not their fault that they were born in these situations. They should be able to give equal playing field. Equal opportunity to succeed. Over here, it's like, I'm sorry, but if you can afford a better education, why not? Why not help your own bloodline? Why not help your children? Wouldn't you do anything for your child, for your mother or father, right? Wouldn't you give them the best healthcare if you could? Yes, it's a beautiful story that everybody should get the same healthcare, but isn't it more beautiful that we fight and that we work towards our own families? If everyone works for their own families, if everyone works for those around them, then everyone will be lifted up. So they say, why not? Now, in the middle, you have mixed economies in Canada who think, sure, a few private schools, sure, we have a few private schools, but let us make sure that our public system is strong. Because again, over here, everything over in this area here believes that if you are born with ADHD, you should be, so a student with ADHD gets more money. An ADHD student gets more funding, taxpayer funding. Now that's not equal, but it is fair, it's equitable, because they need more assistance to get to the same playing field, to get the same opportunities at jobs later. They need help managing their ADHD in order to be successful. So they get more taxpayer money. They get more time from the teacher, more time from EAs. Over here, the ADHD student, work harder. Yeah, you were born, unfortunately, with a challenge that I wasn't. But you know what? If you work really hard, you can overcome it. And if you don't, how is that my fault? It is not my fault. I should not have to pay. Why do I pay for your success? Whatever spelling. Why should I pay for your success, right? Why am I paying so that you can be more successful? Because actually, by me paying for you to be more successful, you will later on, maybe you'll start a business and you'll compete with me. And I don't want that. So in fact, it's okay if you fail. That is okay. You can work in my factory. You know what? Your ADHD, I'll give you a hands-on task that you can do repetitively in my factory. That's what you can do. So some people say that is sad. Oh, poor students who grow up in socioeconomic weaker state. But at the end of the day, we need employees who can do simple tasks, and those who were genetically born or born into money, who get a great education, they're the ones who will run the companies. And that's just the way it's going to be. But that's not to say that the right is heartless. We say, because a lot of people say, okay, well, then the right must be really heartless. Well, maybe there's a lot of selfishness, but it is through the compassion of individuals that help. Think of the Gates Foundation, right? Think of what is his name? Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates, worth billion. The Gates Foundation helps more people than any government in the world has ever helped. Honestly, no government in the world has spent more money on helping those around the world than the Gates Foundation. Think of the Mustard Seed, downtown Calgary. The Mustard Seed is actually run privately by people's donations. So it is not that they don't want to help, it's that allow them to help in my way. Help in my way. Because again, the problem over here is that government is going to decide what is needed. Government decides what is needed, right? Rather than you deciding that I will help, I'm not going to help those who got out of prison for murder. I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm not going to help those who got into alcoholism or drugs. That's their fault. I refuse to help these people. Whereas the government's going to be like, well, you know, they got into drugs early and it's not their fault. Things happen. And it's like, okay. And they're going to spend tax money, your money, taxes go toward helping murderers. Helping murderers, become better citizens, helping drunks and drug abusers, helping rapists, rehabilitate. And maybe we as a society don't want to do that. You bleeding heart liberals want to help these people. Well, I don't. And again, it comes down to the individual. Individuals make decisions for themselves versus the collective make decisions for the collective. Now, this also sounds really good, sort of. Some people are like, well, this sounds really heartfelt. This sounds beautiful in so many ways. The problem is that who's making all the decision? The government. And what if your government sucks? So great example, Stalin. Stalin was in charge of communist USSR, and he thought what would be best for the collective? What's best for the collective is industrialization. So everybody moving into the cities, everyone needs to move from the farm to the city, and we need to build factories. Well, what happened is that millions and millions of people died moving into these factories. Farms were wiped out. Family farms were wiped out. Millions died in those movements. Now, did it help the country? A lot of historians will say that Stalin's decisions to kill off, 5-10 million of his own people to industrialize, they went from a kind of backwards country, Russia, not backwards, just they were like 50 to 75 years behind everybody else. In about 15 years, they became a international superpower in about 15 years under Stalin. So again, did it help the collective? Sure. Did it kill 10 million people? Yes. But again, over here, millions of people die all the time, right? You have billionaires who don't even know what to do with all their money. They have 3 yachts, 18 houses, and 1 million cars. And then you have starvation. How can you justify that? You have people dying of starvation while there are billionaires who live not, 20 kilometers away, who drive by these people starving. So there is a conflict here, and it is recognized. And this is why somewhere in the middle is where most countries choose. Now, does that mean to say that on a market economy, there's no government involvement? Because there is. There are some things the government does. One would be you still need to get everybody, you still need a military, you need security. So sometimes that includes the police. Sometimes it doesn't. If you go far enough over to the right, sometimes police are also private. And if your neighborhood wants to get together and hire a private police force, fine. But if your neighborhood is too poor for a private police force, then you don't get one. But security as in military, you need to protect your borders, because you can be the richest nation in the world, but if you can't protect your borders, someone just takes everything you have. You have contract law. So you have to be able to enforce contract enforcement. If these factories make cars, that you can't have someone just coming and stealing them. So you need to have a contract enforcement, as in you signed a contract that for $10,000 you get this car, now it's yours, right? So contract enforcement is another big one. That's why governments might be involved. I'm trying to think. I know I'm missing something. I'm missing. Okay, I'm missing one of the points. There's government, there's contract enforcement, there's, oh my goodness. All right, well, they might, some people would say fair practice they might get involved in to make sure that the companies aren't lying to the people. So we can put that one in, fair practice. I thought there was another one. How did I forget? So security, military, contract enforcement, those are going to be big ones that the government is involved with. Fair practice, that just means that to ensure that they don't lie. Like a company can't tell you the car is going to go this fast or that fast and just lie to you, because then you as a consumer can't make an appropriate decision. The government enforces capitalism. The government enforces that a consumer must be able to get accurate information, because if the consumer doesn't have accurate information, then they can't actually participate in demanding what they want, in demanding the appropriate thing. And that, again, this comes back down to the reason that we have all of this: competition. Competition drives success. So because you and I are competing for the same job, you will, because you're working for that job, you'll work hard. You'll work harder to get that job, smarter, better, more hours. You will fight, and so will I. I'll do all these things. I will also work harder. I will work smarter. I will be better. I will work long hours. So it pushes both of us to do really well so that we can get these jobs, this one job that we're competing for. Same with two factories, right? Two factories are going to try to make the most efficient, well-priced product they can. And that's how the consumer, Mr. or Mrs. Consumer, will therefore get the best product. Over here on the left, why make a better product? Why make a better product? You have to buy it anyways. Why make a better product? You don't have a choice. You're getting the car anyways. There's no incentive to do it. Okay, one last example before I move to supply and demand. One last example would be, what should I use? Let's use Canadian films. On the left would say that there is not an audience. There's not an audience. We only have 35 million people, and a lot of our 35 million don't care about certain parts of Canadian society. They don't care as much about Canadian history. So there's not an audience to demand. There's no demand for Canadian films, or very little, right? There's very little demand for a history of, I don't know, COVID as it hit Canadians. You know, the Americans, they're going to make one. Hollywood will make a COVID movie. I'll watch that one. But what about the Canadian experience with COVID? What about the Indigenous experience with COVID? There's no money in that. Who's going to buy that film? So no company is going to make it. So the government gives grants, money to make Canadian films. Why? To preserve culture. Preserve culture, right? To preserve our culture, to employ Canadians, right? Will there ever be a Canadian filmmaker if we didn't get like a beginning? Don't get me wrong, there are experienced Canadian filmmakers who go on to Hollywood and work there. But how did they get their experience? They got their experience from Canadian grants, from government grants. That's where they actually got their experience first, is from getting these Canadian grants and making small films about Canada, about where they live, before they could get the experience necessary to go work for real big companies. And there are some really big Canadian companies who do things, but even they don't make Canadian culture films. So where would be Canadian art? Where would be Canadian literature, right? Those of you who want to go into art and literature, there's no money for it unless the government gives grants for it. But on the right, no demand, let it die. Let it die. There's no demand for, there's no demand for it, then we shouldn't make it. It's a waste of resources. This is where the left wastes resources, waste of resources. This is where it's inefficient on the left, because now you put all this money and time into a film very few people are going to watch. Sure, you get art and literature that almost nobody will read. Why don't you put those resources? Why don't you put those factories that are going to print that book? Why don't you put those factories printing books that people will actually read, right? You have a factory. This actually happened in Manitoba. You have a factory that made chocolate bars, but the chocolate bars, they lowered the prices, etc., but there's no money in it. So what they wanted to do was Hershey's, the Hershey company wanted to shut down the factory. They wanted to shut down the factory, but the government said, but what's going to happen to all the workers? All the workers are going to lose their jobs. And it was a small town. So that means the restaurants are going to close. Once the workers can't give money to the restaurants will close. The clothing shops will close. The gas station will close. And the town will die. The town will die, right? So to save that, the government bought the company with taxpayer money, but the company was closed for a reason. So now this factory slowly started losing money, slowly started losing taxpayer money in order to employ all these people. But it isn't a good thing that they employed those people, because all those people now pay taxes themselves back to the government, which helps their company, which then gives them money. It's a nice circular thing. And everybody gets to stay at home where their family grew up for generations. On the right, let it die already. These people move where there is work, move to a town and start a new business somewhere else. The Hershey company, maybe they're out of here, but you know what? Some other company is going to start a factory making cars, move to that place. If Canada is crushed by this, then we move to the United States, but you move to where the work is. That is efficient. That is efficiency. You move to where the actual demand for goods is. That's how it works. Now, speaking of supply and demand, let's talk about demand, because that is what motivates us. Now, I uploaded another video on this, so I'm going to make this brief. Supply, demand, price, quantity. So let's say we're making those chocolate bars. Let's say we're making those chocolate bars. Now, the company used to sell those chocolate bars at $1. The company used to sell them at $1, and at $1, $1. At $1, the company thought, you know what? If I'm making $1 for each chocolate bar, I will make 10,000 of these a day. I'll make 10,000 of these a day. That is the supply bar. The supply bar, that's where the supply was. That's what the supply was. So for $1, they'd make 10,000. And the demand bar is how many chocolate bars people want. So on the demand bar, at $1, at a price of $1, there was about 10,000 people willing to buy those chocolate bars. So everyone was happy. This point is called equilibrium. This part is called equilibrium. Now, if the company were to, for whatever reasons, lower their price to 50 cents, then suddenly you have the company being like, for 50 cents, I'm not making much money off of each. I'll make 5,000 maybe. I'm going to fire half the people working in my factory, and I'm only going to make half because I'm not really making much money. It's not worth all the money I put in. I'm barely making enough. At 50 cents, maybe I'll make 5,000. But at 50 cents, oh my goodness, the demand was really high. The demand was for 15,000 chocolate bars, right? And there is a disconnect between those two. So there is far more people who want it versus whatever. So this is why they raised their price. Because at 50 cents, they were like, well, we shouldn't even bother. But oh, look at how many people are wanting it. You know what? Let's raise our price. And sure, some of these 15,000, when they raised their price, they were like, too expensive. But they hit the sweet spot where for $1, it was worth us employing enough people, making 10,000 at $1. And there was 10,000 people who wanted it. And again, they said, let's experiment with putting it all the way up at $2. Our chocolate bars are pretty good. Will anybody want it for $2? And they found out that at $2, no. Some people really loved their chocolate bar. So sure, you had 1,000 people who were willing to spend $2 on your chocolate bar. And man, at $2, oh, we'll make 15,000 of these things at $2. But again, you just have waste. This would just be an excess. This would be waste, inefficient. So this is why this is why capitalism, this is why the market economy is efficient. This is another argument to show that they're efficient because they find the sweet spot where they produce just enough that it all sells. Excellent. Hopefully that all made sense because I have one more thing to add to this. Let's get rid of all this so it doesn't confuse us. Okay. Okay. So this is where we were. Now, what happens though, and this is what happened in Manitoba, the price of cocoa went up in the world. The price of cocoa in the world went up. The price of cocoa went up in the world, which means that it was actually now more expensive than ever. It was more expensive than ever to actually make the chocolate bars. So now that it's more expensive to make the chocolate bars, the supply line itself moved. The supply line moved, meaning now at $1, it's only worth making 5,000. At $1, demand didn't change. 10,000 people still want it. 10,000 people still want it, but they can't make it work. They can't make it work. The company can't make it work. At $1, it's just not worth making 10,000 of them. So they only made 5,000, which means that there was 5,000 people. There was 5,000 people who were unhappy. But now look at this. There's a new equilibrium. There's a new equilibrium. So the company decides to charge more. They start charging $1.50. And sure enough, they found that 7,500 people were still willing to buy it at $1.50. And they came to a new price. They came to a new price at $1.50, equals 7,500 people will buy it. That's fine with them. Huzzah! Everybody's happy again to some extent. Now, what happened in Manitoba was at $1.50 and selling only 7,500, it wasn't worth keeping that big of a factory open. So that's what happened. Now, let's go back. Let's get rid of all this. Sorry. There. Okay. But let's say something else happened. Let's say that they found out that the factory was using child labor. And everyone was like, Hershey's, you disgust me. Then suddenly the demand bar changes. Let's assume that this Hershey company was using child labor. Very bad. The demand line moves. Now, what would happen is that even at $1 now, only 5,000 people want it because you use child labor. Nobody wants that garbage. So the company still hasn't changed. They still at $1 are willing to make 10,000, but nobody wants it because of their child labor. So, but again, there is a new equilibrium. So they would have to lower their price to like 70 cents, whatever this is, 60 cents. And then maybe 7,500 people would be willing to purchase it, which maybe they wouldn't be efficient for the factory. So they would close down, etc. So that's an example of supply and demand. The other advertising, how advertising plays a role. Those of you who have asked in the past about advertising, let's get rid of all these. Advertising plays in the opposite direction. So advertising increases the demand. So now for the same amount of money, more people want it. More people want it because Justin Bieber took a drink of that Coca-Cola and now everybody wants to drink Coke. Whatever the case may be, that's how the advertising works on this graph. Now, you do not have to memorize how this graph works. What you have to do is you have to use common sense. What I mean is think to yourself, if the price of something goes up, you can memorize this graph and how it works, but you don't need to. This is actually above grade 9 curriculum, the graph part. But what you do have to know for the grade 9 curriculum is that if the price goes up, fewer people want it. Fewer people want it or demand it. So fewer people demand it. Demand goes down. Price goes up, demand goes down. Price goes up, suppliers are more willing to make it. So suppliers will want anyways to make more. They'll want to make more, and they often do. So supply goes up. Price goes up, supply goes up because there'll be more factories will open. Suddenly it's worthwhile to build a factory because the price of it went up. Look at oil. When oil goes up, suddenly there's more oil companies, right? Oil price goes up, more factories. Supply goes up. But of course, when supply goes up, in the long run, after these factories get built and supply goes up, the price will come down. Because if there's more oil to be had in the world, then it's less valuable, right? I use the example all the time. If diamonds were to rain from the sky, suddenly the price of it would go down. Suddenly everyone would be like, sure, I built my house out of diamonds. Because they're worth nothing now because there's just so many of them. Okay, so use common sense when it comes to supply and demand. What makes the most sense? When prices go up, we don't want as much of it. When prices go down, we want more of it. When there's more of it around, right? If in our classroom of 25 kids, if there are 100 cookies available, you don't rush towards the cookies. You go over there, you grab one, you grab two, whatever. But if there's only 5 cookies and 25 of you, suddenly those cookies are valuable and everybody runs over to grab one. So if there's more of it, less valuable. Less of it, more valuable. Right? Think of pieces of art, right? If there's only one Picasso left, all the rest get destroyed. That one Picasso is going to be worth more. Just use common sense. Oh, I'm on the very last point. My very last point is about unions because it's part of the curriculum. So I thought I'd just cover it really quick. Because on the right, this applies to the right and to mixed and market economies. On the left, you don't really need unions because ideally everyone's in the union. Everyone is working together towards the same collective. Everyone's working together, huzzah. But on the mixed and market, well, what happens if the business Business hurts employees. What if the owner says, if you don't do these unsafe things, I need you to take this dynamite into that cave. And you say, I don't think so. It's like, well, then you're fired. Right? If they start asking unreasonable things and then threatening to fire you, well, you need that job. Suddenly the boss, an individual boss, has all the power. And that can be scary. So what you do is you make a union, so that as collective workers, you can fight against the boss. Because the boss still needs you. The boss still needs all the employees. So if there's 1,000 employees and he or she, the boss, is going to punish one of them for something they didn't do, all 1,000 can rise up and defend the one. And therefore the boss has to treat all well. Otherwise, he or she, the whole group will go on strike, will refuse to work. They'll protest. They will get they'll get the population on their side and tell everybody else to boycott your company. We talked about boycotting once. Boycotting is the refusal to buy. Refusal to buy. That's what boycotting means. So if you find out a company is using child labor, you will refuse to buy it. And because there's so many people now, so the demand line moves because people refuse to buy as long as you use child labor. This is a boycott. This is telling the company, if you keep doing things that with using child labor, we won't buy from you. So then they hopefully will stop. They'll stop using child labor and the line will move back to where it was. That's what boycotts do. And that is all called collective bargaining. Collective bargaining. Voila. Hopefully that covered most of what you need to know. Unions use collective bargaining. But so do consumers. Consumers use collective bargaining through boycotts, through refusing to buy from companies that destroy the environment, et cetera, et cetera. Collective bargaining. You need to know that word. You need to know what unions do. All right. Best of luck. Cheers.